Yeah, they're dug in good. So what? They got no food in their bellies. They're shivering out there.
Blackjack Pershing ain't got a clue. Hunn've got bunkers made of solid concrete, guns the size of houses.
Concrete pillboxes, strafing guns, mustard gas.
At the river, I saw a dozen of us blown to fragments by a shell. The Spirit of Liberty ain't got no protection against those things.
I say it's time us greenhorns put old Hun out of his misery.
I got my bayonet fixed, my rifle loaded, and I'm ready to kill every last one of them bastards.
Salutations, Signal Corps Specialist. Automatic here for Automatic Games, bringing you another video, part of my Battlefield 1 series, this one appropriately entitled Argonne Forest.
The Germans occupy several strongholds within the Argonne Forest. Our priority is to take the Ritz bunker here. Once this position is secured, we must attack and hold the bridge at Hellfire Junction. From here, we launch our attack on their lines and take control of these abbey ruins.
Those abbey ruins are representative of the church ruins at Montfaucon, which was Montfaucon was a small village in the Argonne vicinity, and it was the scene of such intense fighting, the likes of which you'd see at Mulville Farm and so many other areas in that sector. But I want to get across quite a bit of information within the constraints of a relatively short video as far as my videos are concerned. So let's get to it. The Meuse-Argonne offensive took place in late September, is when it started anyway. September 26th to be precise. And it was on the heels of the Battle of Saint-Mihiel, which we spoke about in the last video. In Saint-Mihiel, some of the same units involved there were going to be involved in the Meuse-Argonne. The United States forces consisted initially of 9 divisions, 4 of which were green, the other 5 which had seen previous experience, not just at Saint-Mihiel, but prior to that. Of course, commanded by Blackjack Pershing, augmented by the French 4th Army that held their left flank, which was commanded by a famous general, General Henry Barrade. And we're also seeing familiar names on the German side. General Max von Gallwitz, who was at Saint-Mihiel, had fallen back to this position and linked up with George von der Marwitz. Marwitz was in command of the 5th Army. He was kind of a well-known German commander, not the likes of like Ludendorff or von Hindenburg, but he was really well trusted by them. Suffice it to say, he was a Prussian cavalry commander, and in fact commanded cavalry at the onset of World War I. Ultimately, when they realized that cavalry's time had more or less passed, they put him in charge of the 2nd Army, and at this point he's in charge of the 5th Army. He's had experience on the Western Front, the Eastern Front, and then back out to the Western Front. He's got a lot, in his memoirs, he's got a lot to say about tanks because, well, in 1917, he helped counter an unprecedented armor assault against Cambrai. That was a British assault. He was also involved in the St. Quentin actions. In fact, he was, as far as Operation Michael was concerned, their high water mark, which went all the way up to Villers-Bretonneux. He was there and commanding there. But yes, at this point he's in the Meuse-Argonne vicinity, attempting to repel this American-led assault. And in fact, I have a quote on hand by him just to kind of serve as an example of the confidence that this man exuded. And he did exude quite a bit of confidence throughout the war. But I quote,
"It is on the unconquerable resistance of the Verdun front that depends the fate of a great part of the Western front, perhaps even of our nation. The fatherland must rest assured that every commander and every man realizes the greatness of his mission, that he will do his duty to the very end. If they do this, the enemy's attack will, as heretofore, break against our firm will to hold."
End quote. And certainly, I mean, the Germans did have They had the advantage in that they had spent 4 years in this sector, giving them ample time to dig in, and dig in they did. They had large artillery forces on both the right and left flanks of the American or the Allied forces. They were in a good position.
Half of our forces remain.
In fact, the German army of the time, their fortifications, when juxtaposed against the relative inexperience of the American First Army, that could only lend further to contribute to this air of overconfidence that was held by General Marwitz. Now, all the fortifications in the world went up against 1.2 million troops, and that is what we ended up ultimately putting into the Meuse-Argonne offensive, 1.2 million. And the Argonne still stands today as the bloodiest battle in United States history. And perhaps it's those numbers that led to the confidence on the part of the United States brass. In fact, General Pershing, he assured his subordinates and counterparts that this offensive was going to be a 36-hour affair. But this was not going to be the Battle of St. Mihiel. I'm sorry. In fact, I mentioned that it started on September 26th. It didn't conclude until November 11th, the last day of the war. So this wasn't going to be the short 36-hour affair that Pershing had indicated that it might be. I mentioned some of the soldiers involved in the last battle, some of the officers involved in St. Mihiel, and they were here too. That is Patton, MacArthur, Donovan, but there's some others that I should point out, like George Marshall pretty much handled the logistics for the Argonne. And Marshall should be a name that might be recognized because of World War II, and he was Secretary of State. He was Chief of Staff of the Army for Harry Truman. And Harry Truman, that's another man that fought in the Argonne. He was an artillery commander. Charles Whittlesey, he was in charge of the Lost Battalion, the famed Lost Battalion, who they advanced into the Argonne. And this was in the second phase of the Battle of the Argonne. They advanced with, French on one flank and an American battalion on their other flank, and both of those flanks were pushed back by a German counterattack, unbeknownst to the 77th, which was the Lost Battalion. And so they just kept moving forward and ended up in their own little salient, surrounded by German forces, and they had to hold out there. Of the 500-some troops that went in, 2/3 of them were casualties. So less than 200 came out unscathed. But and in fact, they even undertook a friendly fire at one point, and they sent their last courier pigeon, Cherami, a famous bird that was wounded, but nevertheless got the message back to command saying, you're shelling us. Please stop. And of course, I'm paraphrasing, but let's see who else might be recognizable. The Army Air Service here was commanded by Billy Mitchell. The B-25 bomber was named after him. He, after World War I, he got into a major spat in the U.S. military about bombers over battleships, so to speak. That we should produce more bombers because, in effect, they could sink a battleship with the snap of a finger. But so many people rejected that, and they refused to learn that lesson. But I'll tell you who did take that lesson was Imperial Japan. Hello, Pearl Harbor. But yeah, Billy Mitchell, the unofficial father of the United States Air Force. Private York. Private York is a name you might recognize. Whether it was luck, skill, or just providence that this guy managed to take as many prisoners as he took. I don't have the numbers on hand, but 125 or more German prisoners. I know that he's confirmed at killing 25 Germans in one specific firefight. In fact, I do have a quote from Alvin York, and I'll share that with you now. It's from his diary, which you can find online. Alvin York's diary. It's really worth the read. It's a interesting account. But here's the crux of why he was so cheered and so awarded.
In the middle of the fight, a German officer and 5 men done jumped out of the trench and charged me with fixed bayonets.
They had about 25 yards to come, and they were coming right smart. I only had about half a clip left in my rifle, but I had my pistol ready. I done flipped it out fast and teched them off too. I teched off the 6th man first, then the 5th, then the 4th, then the 3rd, and so on. That's the way we shoot wild turkeys at home. You see, you don't want the front ones to know that we're getting the back ones, so they just keep on coming until we get them all. Of course, I hadn't time to think of that. I guess I just naturally did it. I know too that if the front ones wavered or if I stopped them, the rear ones would just drop down and pump a volley into me and get me. Then I returned to my rifle, and I kept on after those machine guns. I'd know now that if I done kept my head, and I didn't run out of ammunition, I had them. So I done hollered up to them to come down and give up. I didn't want to kill any more than I had to. I would take a couple of them off and holler again, but I guess they couldn't understand my language, or else they couldn't hear me in the awful racket that was going on all around. Over 20 Germans were killed over this time. And I got a hold of the German major. And he see me stop the 6 Germans who charged me with fixed bayonets. He got up off the ground and he walked over to me and he yelled, "English?" I said, "No, not English." He said, "What?" I said, "American." He said, "Good." Then he said, "If you won't shoot anymore, I'll make them give up."
End quote. I love that little exchange. English? I think he was saying, "Do you speak English?" And of course York's like, "American?" I don't know. I find some things humorous that other people might not find humorous. That's the crux of that. But yeah, Private York, that was in this battle, and certainly a man that gained much attention due to his exploits, which were properly verified. The boys with York filed affidavits, testifying as to what they saw him do. Even the Germans acknowledged what he accomplished. And so Private York, he was highly deserving of the awards that he was granted for his actions that day. And like so many recipients of medals, he was altogether modest. That kind of modesty you see from so many service personnel that are thrown into the thick of it. And that kind of modesty, it engenders humility in those of us that hear about it or read about it. It really does. Now, I'd argue that Private York, later Sergeant York, ultimately, and you'd have to fact check me on this, I think he ended up as a colonel. But I would argue that he was just one of many soldiers in the Argonne learning on the job. To explain why I say that, we'd have to rewind to early 1918 when U.S. soldiers were first arriving in Europe. Our allies, the French and British, our seasoned allies, they were generously willing to instruct us on what it was like to conduct trench warfare, to deal with gas attacks, and to more or less fight the Germans. After all, they had been doing it for years. Sadly, part of the response to this, on the part of many of our senior officers, was resentment. A rejection of the attempted lesson. And even 100 years removed, I still find that attitude disgusting. There was this notion among the senior ranks that the American soldier, that guts alone would turn back the Kaiser's men. And the way I see it, that's altogether negligent. Because after all, I think the net result of such an attitude is that our soldiers would ultimately learn the lesson. They would learn it here in the Argonne. And sadly, the instructors would be General Marwitz, General Gallwitz, and the Germans that were so well fortified in the Argonne forest. The very last people that you would want teaching your soldiers the lesson would be the ones giving them the hard lesson. But you gotta hand it to our doughboys, they learned quick. I guess they had to, right? Now, I don't resent the senior officers in the U.S. 1st and 2nd Army. After all, I think I look up to some of them. But I do resent the attitude, and they are fallible. They're human. Anyways, let's transition to the overall strategy. We've talked about the who, what, when, where, and how, but let's talk about why we were launching the Meuse-Argonne offensive. In the Battle of Saint-Mihiel, it was to take back a railroad that otherwise the Allies could have used to move troops and supplies. And so we were trying to take it back from the Germans. Now here we were doing the opposite. There was a railroad hub at a town called Sedan that the Germans were utilizing to great effect. Even during this battle, they were using it to reinforce, bringing up new divisions. In essence, if we were able to cut that rail line, or at least threaten it, we would be hamstringing the German army on the Western Front in the north. And ultimately, after paying a price of over 25,000 dead, nearly 200,000 casualties, we accomplished just that. Now to talk about some of the effects of the Argonne, I think I'll close with a quote from General John Blackjack Pershing. And I quote,
"Summarizing the material results attained by the First Army by the end of October, we had met an increasing number of Germany's best divisions, rising from 20 in line in reserve on September 26 to 31 on October 31st. The enemy's elaborately prepared positions, including the Hindenburg Line in our front, had been broken. An almost impassable Argonne force was in our hands. An advance of 21 kilometers had been effected. 18,600 prisoners, 370 cannon, 1,000 machine guns, and a mass of material captured. And the great railway artery through Carrington to Sedan was now seriously threatened. The demands of incessant battle, which had been maintained day by day for more than a month, had compelled our divisions to fight to the limit of their capacity. Combat troops were held in line and pushed to the attack until deemed incapable of further effort because of casualties or exhaustion. Artillery, once engaged, was seldom withdrawn, and many batteries fought until practically all the animals were casualties and the guns were towed out of line by motor trucks. The American soldier had shown unrivaled fortitude in this continuous fighting during most inclement weather and under many disadvantages of position. Through experience, the Army had developed into a powerful and smooth-running machine. And there was a supreme confidence in our ability to carry through the task successfully."
end quote. Thank you, General Pershing. Thank you to the souls that fought and died in the Argonne Forest. This is Automatic for Automatic Games. If you like this, Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon, friends.